Morning. I'm Councillor James Cole, Chair of Personnel Committee. I'm joined by the following members of committee today: Councillors Adrian Abbs, Jeff Brooks, Howard Wollaston and Richard Sumner. Paula Goodwin and Abby Whitting are the professional officers who will be advising the meeting. Sadie Owen is the clerk and Stephen Child is the Zoom host. Firstly, apologies. We do have an apology.
Yeah, apologies from Garth Simpson.
And Richard Sumner is substituting for Garth. Minutes. Do we have any comments on the minutes? Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Chairman. I note it says point 4, concern was raised at the gender workforce split. It's not that I believe is incorrect. It says, and the fact that there was a career progression for women. No issue was raised about having been anything to do with career progression for women during that meeting that I recall. Simply, I do recall the 76% 24 concern and that there needed to be some projects for men to address that balance, but I don't remember anybody arguing against career progression for women project. So,
do we have any other comments?
Very small one, Chairman. I think Dennis Benworth was a sub at the meeting, and in point 4, paragraph 3, I think should read 4 offers, not just looking offers.
Right. Do you have a view on Councillor Abbs's comment? Because I don't.
If I may, Chairman, I just think that, that the reference there is incorrect. It then goes on to talk about there should be emphasis, or what was discussed about there should be equal programs for men as well. But I just don't remember anybody being negative about any projects that enhance the opportunities for women.
The emphasis is the wrong way around.
Yeah, I just don't think that particular part and the fact there had been a career progression project of concern. There was no concern raised about that at all that I'm aware of or recall. The recording would show this, of course, but I don't remember
So we have questioning in that respect.
Yes.
With those amendments, could I have a proposer then?
I propose, Chairman.
Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Abbs. All in favour? Thank you. As well. In that case, declarations of interest. Do we have any? No, good. Let's move straight on to item 4. Paula, would you be so kind as to introduce your report?
Yeah, so I'm going to start. Sorry. So I'm going to start with the first section of the report, and then I'm going to hand over to Abby, and Abby's going to do the remaining sections of the report, if that's okay with everybody. So the first part of the report, and this was brought at the request of members from the previous meeting, so I believe it's noted in the minutes in terms of some of the information that members requested from the previous meeting. So hopefully this covers the majority of that request. The first part of the report is around appraisals and our behaviour framework. So there's a piece of work going on in the organisation where we are reviewing our competency framework, and we will be looking at replacing our competency framework with a behaviour framework. And that behaviour framework will be embedded into all of our performance management policies, procedures, processes, and the culture of the organisation in terms of the way we manage our performance management for employees within the organisation. And at the moment, we have the competency framework within the appraisal document. It isn't seen anywhere else in terms of policies and procedures, and it isn't used for anything else at this moment in time. The plan will be that we embed it in things like recruitment as well. So we'll look at our recruitment processes and procedures going forward, and we'll look at using that behaviour framework for our recruitment activity, as well as everything from appraisals to induction to probation to capability, disciplinary, etc. So that piece of work has started in relation to the review of the behaviour framework, and hopefully there'll be something to bring to members in the early part of the summer, so you can have a look at what that looks like. At the moment, we're in the process of discussing with managers and staff in terms of what that might look like. And obviously there'll need to be a formal piece of consultation for that as well with our trade unions. The other part of that report is there's appraisal data in there. So what you've got is actually reflective of a current position. So around the 7th of February, that data is accurate in terms of the number of appraisals that have taken place in the organisation. So it is data, and obviously I'm happy to take questions in relation to that data and that part of the report. I don't know whether you want to do questions as we go along, Sadie. Do we want to do questions as we go along for each section of the report? Yeah.
If that suits you, do we have any questions at this point? Councillor Brooks.
So the questions should be what, about appraisals at this stage?
Yeah, so if we keep to each section of the report, if that's okay.
Where are we on? Are we on appraisals?
So we're doing appraisals and behaviour framework, yeah.
So, Chairman, I'm looking at 5.3 and the table above it. And generally, you know, environment stands out as a bit of a beacon in this. The others are sort of, and strategy and governance. I think that's excellent. ICT is particularly ropey, and the rest are sort of okay, but can do better. What confused me, although I think I know the answer, at 5.3, at present, employees and line managers do not have specific windows for completion of appraisal each year. Why not? Is this another one of these occasions where we don't put an emphasis and an imperative on a manager to use a particular system? And it's determined by the policy there are continual messages cascaded. Well, you shouldn't have to keep doing continual messages. Managers should know they've got to do their appraisals, and they should be appraised on doing their appraisals. So I hope that will get much more robust, please.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. My impression is that this document is telling us that this is changing. Paula, what would you like to tell us?
Yeah, so this is the current position in terms of our appraisal policy. And with the new behaviour framework that will come in, we will also be reviewing the appraisal process, procedure, etc. And all of those things that you have mentioned will be taken account of as part of that review. So at the moment, there aren't specific dates that are set for employees to have their appraisals by, and that's something we do want to rectify. So that will be within the new process.
If I may come back, John, I'd like to feel that would be minuted. And also I would like to say that appraisal is not the be all and end all. And I see a lot of organisations saying we'll cover that in the appraisal in 6 months' time. Management is an all-day task, everyday task. And so I hope we are training our managers in interacting with their staff to pick up issues way outside the appraisal process. Because as I say, management can be and often should be a full-time task.
So we do run appraisal training, and we do make sure that we encourage our managers to hold those appraisals. Of course, it isn't just appraisals. Obviously, we've got new starters who have induction, probation, and one-to-ones as well on a regular basis. When we review that appraisal process, we will be looking at it in totality. So we will be looking at whether or not what we have in place now is the right way to run appraisals, or whether there's a different way to do it that is much more informative for our employees and much more supportive for our managers in terms of that future process. And of course, if we change it, there will be more training and support and engagement for those managers to make sure that those appraisals take place in the form that they're in. And of course, for our employees, because it's really important that we have a system that employees are encouraged, but also participate fully in that process. So there will be lots more training coming forward.
You're happy with that, Councillor Brooks? I see this as progress.
Chairman, I'll wait to see the progress as this review comes out with its recommendations.
Indeed. Abby, do you want to come in on that? I've seen you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a small clarification regarding the sentence about the specific windows. What that's referring to is it's not a specific month of the year that an appraisal will be completed, because everybody must have an appraisal and a 6-month review. However, some managers have a significant number of direct reports, and therefore it would be quite difficult for them to say throughout March do everybody's appraisal at that point in time. So that's why some teams will have more of a continual appraisal process, because they've got to fit those in. But they also have, as Paul has said, the one-to-ones should happen every 4 to 6 weeks, as well as the appraisal and the 6-month review. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you.
I understand that. That's why you got the 15-month window. What I'm saying is, with some of these ICT I pointed out, there needs to be a robust process where the managers know they've got to prioritise this.
Your point is noted. Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just point out that the new Chief Executive, Nigel Lynn, is very hot on this. And I think it's going to be downward pressure from the top through the executive directors to make sure it's corrected. My understanding, by the way, is that ICT have caught up very rapidly in the last 2 weeks. Yeah. Can I just raise there the question of grading at appraisals effectively? I totally understand you don't want to have A, B, C, D, E's or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s, but I would like to see some sort of indication of whether people are outperforming, underperforming, doing the job they should be doing, etc.
Makes sense to me, Paula.
And again, as part of the behaviour framework work, that is what we're looking at in terms of an appropriate measure. So that will form part of that project, and then there will be further details when that's determined.
Okay. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Chairman. Previous meetings we've heard about, this is to do with training. It's following on from Councillor Brooks's comment. So
we're on appraisals here.
Yeah, I know, but the appraisals were linked to more training. The statement was made about more training, and of course, one of the issues that we've identified in the past is that people aren't attending the trainings. So how are we going to kind of round off this square peg so it will go through the hole, basically? In that, if
would you like to talk about training?
Is it something we could pick up, because there's a whole section on training?
By all means, but it's given what the comment here is. If we're going to say training is the answer to that appraisals, then we also need to
pick it up in training.
Yeah.
Would you like to? I don't think we've got any more questions. Would you like to move on? Councillor Sumner has his hand up now. You've got a different coloured hand, and I didn't pick it up.
Sorry, Chairman. Yeah, I think potentially some of the questions that are understandably being raised with regards to grading and such like potentially could be covered if there was a copy of the actual documentation that we're going to be using in the policy, and I would look to that being an appendix on there, because at least then everybody is able to see exactly what the framework is being worked. That's being worked. I think for me and the appraisals that I do, they're very much more streamlined now than they used to be historically, generally. But you do still need to look at whether people at the end of their review period are in need of support, are delivering as you would expect them to do, or actually are outstanding in their performance. And I think those are three probably key areas that you would like to be able to classify members of your team as to their onward development from that point. So from an appraisal point of view, for me personally, it would be useful to see the sort of framework that we're talking about being displayed within this document. And I am scrolling through as I'm speaking, so forgive me if it is in there, but I can't see it at the moment. That explains to anybody that picks it up exactly what is being used by managers to complete their appraisals for their team.
Your new framework is going to...
So are you asking for the current appraisal document?
I think either or. There needs to be a reference to the document that's being used at the time. So recognising that this one is referring to an old one but bringing in a new one, the ability to see either one or the other or both to view the comparison, I think would be useful for anybody reviewing this paper.
Okay, well, maybe we can put a link in, or send a copy of the current arrangement. The new one isn't in place at the moment, so the new one is part of a project that is being developed. So there isn't really anything to share at this moment in time. It will be late spring, early summer before there is something ready to share, because that, like I say, that's in very draft format at the minute.
Anything else at this stage? Over to you, Paula, again.
Are we finished on that section of the paper?
I think we are now finished. There's no more hands come up.
Okay, so I'll hand over to Abby then. Abby's going to pick up the next 3 sections of the paper. If we do them in one
Okay.
by one and then ask questions, that's probably the best way to do it.
Good morning. So the council has a range of policies and procedures that covers a number of different parts of the employee life cycle. So including disciplinary grievances, performance capability, probation that we've briefly mentioned, sickness absence and ill health capability. And we support managers in managing these situations to a resolution. We also perform a number of exercises around organisational change, so where there's a restructure. And that can include a TUPE transfer, that is transferring employees in or out of the organisation. And on occasions, those can lead to redundancies. We also, in addition to supporting corporate teams, we provide a traded service for schools, and currently 55% of West Berkshire schools buy back into that. So our policies and procedures are based on ACAS guidelines, and our initial emphasis is on trying to resolve matters informally where possible. We need to act consistently, share information, act promptly, and exercise the right to representation at formal meetings with a work colleague or a trade union representative, reasonable notice of meetings, and a right to appeal. We have a number of KPIs that are measured regularly that looks at formal cases, informal cases, the average feedback from managers, look at occupational health referrals and contacts with the employee assistance programme, as well as the number of redundancies within the organisation. So the tables on page 14 highlight the informal and formal cases that we've had. And over the past 4 years, formal casework has made up between 24% and 27% of all cases. So that emphasises where we have been looking to try and informally deal with matters before they get to a significant problem. A lot of our informal casework relates to sickness absence, and having the employee assistance programme and occupational health is an excellent tool in facilitating resolution of those. For the 2021-22 year, there have been 12 disciplinary cases and 5 grievances. So the number of formal cases was in 2018 12, but it's been much lower in subsequent years. Part of sickness absence has been affected by the pandemic. Obviously, there have been an increase in the number of ill health retirements, and we believe that this is related to people reconsidering management of their health conditions and perhaps a result of an ageing workforce in some sectors. The number of formal disciplinary cases fluctuates between 7 and 21. So 7 in 2020-21 was a particularly low number, but that again is probably a reflection of the fact that resources were being utilised to respond to pandemic. There has been an increase in other casework over the period of time, which doesn't sort of fit into any particular category. Shall I stop at that point?
I'd just like to say, Chairman,
Councillor
forgive
Brooks
me.
wants to talk.
We have read the document and I can see it on the screen, and you seem to be reading the document. Forgive me, Abby. I like what you do, but I don't need it read to me.
Okay, that's fine, no problem. We then talk about our employment tribunals. We've had historically low numbers of tribunal situations. If you can see the trend in terms of absence days lost per person. So in the last year, those have been lower. That is probably due to the fact that more people have been able to work from home. So whereas they wouldn't have been fit to come into the office, they have been able to work from home. We do benchmark those statistics, and as you can see, there is narrative around that. So we are in line with public sector organisations, although it is worth noting that we have a particular makeup of our workforce with a large percentage of the workforce being in adult social care. And obviously that does, due to the direct contact with unwell individuals, can lead to increases in absences. Councillor Abs, I can see, has raised his hand.
Councillor Abs.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, you just mentioned the line in line with public sector. Always slightly concerned me that because that's I know it sounds like comparing light with light, but what's it compared with industry standards? Because my understanding of the public sector is that it tends to be not follow quite the same trends as the private sector. So overall, what is the situation?
Against the private sector?
The overall, no, private and public. So how?
A public sector sickness absence is generally slightly higher than the private sector.
What slightly, please? Can you be specific at all?
I'm afraid I don't have access to the statistics. I'm covering this at. Rebecca Bird wrote this piece of the report and has left the organisation as of last week. So I'm picking it up as a colleague.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Perhaps we might pick that up.
Yeah, I think if you're interested in private sector data, then that's something we can share going forward. It's not something we generally benchmark against.
No, but
clearly we're trying to benchmark.
As a society, we need to improve our efficiency for all the benefits that leads to. So benchmarking ourselves only against other people who are doing exactly the same job or very similar jobs. They're not identical, but there are similar jobs in the private sector. If we are significantly lower, then that's something we probably ought to look at.
Yeah, I think it needs a holistic view, though, in terms of not just looking at data. So you would need to not just look at the sector itself, but you would need to look at their policies, their procedures, and how they dealt with sickness absence, because it can vary from organisation to organisation. So I think if we're going to do that, we
indeed there may be learnings for us. Yes.
Yeah, rather than just the data, because and in some cases probably worse. Actually, it could be worse.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's learnings all round, then, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. But
thanks.
Perhaps a comment for the next meeting.
Yeah, we can certainly bring some private sector data to and obviously anything else we can find.
Great. Councillor Brooks, you've been trying to attract my attention.
Thank you, Chairman. Overall, I don't think this is bad at all, particularly in a period of pandemic, and give credit where it's due. If we maintain the 7.15 days in 6.7, that will be a very good improvement. So I won't say we're satisfied. You'll never be satisfied with that. You always try and improve it, but that isn't something that would cause me too much alarm. I actually pressed Joseph Holmes to have the Employment Tribunal data on here, and although it is low, I think it should have two other KPIs. One is how long are they still open? What's the average length of time that it takes for us to manage out a tribunal? That has something to do with the tribunals being able to sit, of course. So, for instance, the 1920 and the 2021, there were two corporate in each year. Are they done, dusted? I would imagine the 21-22 is still open from experience of being an employer and having to attend these things. And what's the cost of the council? Were we successful? Not too much detail, obviously, because of some privacy, but an overall cost to the council is perfectly reasonable to expect to see. They're very time consuming, and it's nice to see they're managed. But a couple more pieces of information would be helpful, please.
Happy with that?
Yeah, but I, in terms of putting that in a published report, I think we would need to consider taking advice from the monitoring officer because of the data that we would be publishing. And obviously we have to abide by the law in terms of GDPR. So we would need to take some advice from the monitoring officer in terms of whether we could publish that type of data or whether it is deemed confidential information that would just be shared with members in a different form. The cases that you've got in front of you, they're all live cases. So these are not cases that are completed. My understanding is that we don't ever make it to tribunal. So from speaking to, I mean, I've only been here 7-8 months, but my understanding is we never get to tribunal. Those cases generally are either thrown out for some different reasons, or they are dealt with prior to getting to tribunal. So as an organisation, that's not something that we usually get to. But if you want more details of those individual cases, I think that's something that would need to be dealt with outside of this particular meeting.
I was very careful what I said, very careful. I said, are they completed? I didn't ask for more detail than that. And I did ask if there was any cost to the council. So by all means, go and talk to the monitoring officer, bring it back as part 2 if you must. But I do think this committee is entitled to know, and I'll ask the question now, why 2 cases that started in 2019 are still outstanding? That's nearly 3 years. That's 3 years of somebody having to take up a case against us and it hanging around. And you said, I think you said it's not even got to an employment tribunal. How on earth do we spend 3 years trying to sort something out and it hasn't even got to an employment tribunal? Because if it does, that'll be another year. That sounds crazy to me.
Yeah, and unfortunately the cases, and they will be individual cases, as in each will act on its own merits, then they're never that straightforward in terms of some can take more than 2 or 3 years to get to tribunal because of individual circumstances that I don't really want to go into in terms of the meeting. Like I say, I'm happy to provide more detail outside of this because it is a public forum, but there will be good reasons why those tribunals are taking that length of time.
We will
As a
come back. to that.
KPI, Chairman, I think it is a good one. It will keep the focus on getting these resolved, not only for cost and time is money to our officers, but also the well-being of those people who are involved.
So what do you want as the KPI?
I'd like to know the average length of time one of these grievances, which ends up probably as a tribunal or a potential for a tribunal. There are claims received here. Want to know the average length of time, how many are open still, how long they've been open. And I think by that spotlight, Chairman, we may get a little bit more focus on getting them resolved because they do take up a lot of time, as the officer will know, and they are complex. And I've been there, and I know how difficult it is to get people to respond. All sorts of reasons why, but I still think this committee should be looking at that overview, that helicopter view of the length of time they're taking to resolve and the costs associated.
It doesn't sound as if it's GDPR restricted.
Let me take it back to the monitoring officer and have a conversation. I think that's the best thing to do, and then come back to you. That would be my preference. Okay. I think in terms of KPI, I'm happy to have a look at it. I think we just need to err on the side of caution in terms of the fact that there might be an employee at the end of this or an ex-employee, but sometimes it's out of the control of the organisation in terms of what's happening. And therefore, we just have to take account of that in terms of when we're looking at KPIs, that it's not all about doing.
I'm going to stop in a moment, and you're going to stop me if I don't. But I think it's incumbent on Councillor Wollaston to be on top of these things, even if the officer is very concerned about bringing them to a public domain. I think it's incumbent on the executive member to make sure these are being expedited with proper speed.
I'm sure that Councillor Wollaston would entirely agree with you.
Very happy to take that on board, Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay.
And if we have to do a part 2 at the next meeting, we'll do a part 2 at the next meeting. So be it. Any other questions at this point? Right. Continue.
Okay, yeah. So we have long-term absence is the majority of our absence, and we have seen an increase in stress, depression and mental health related absence. And we are taking steps in relation to that in terms of referrals to occupational health, and we introduced an EAP during the pandemic, to an employee assistance program to provide additional support. We've also recently introduced a salary finance support system as well, which are all items that can help dealing with stress, depression and well-being. We have an occupational health service who provides 2 aspects. One is pre-employment medicals, but then we also have occupational health referrals during sickness absence cases. In addition to both of those, so the EAP does include counselling, but we also have a portfolio of private counsellors that we can refer members of staff to. As you can see in the last year, that has increased. There has been quite a lot of stress related to dealing with the pandemic, and some staff members have particularly had some difficult situations through their job role to attend to. That's the end of the sickness absence. So I'll pause there in case there's any other questions.
Any questions? Councillor Abs?
Best way to say this. It'd be very interesting to understand the makeup of who's suffering stress, purely from a perspective of Time Law 2 and so on. And what strikes me is, and I'm kind of using broad brushstrokes here, so please don't kind of put too much association with gender to what I'm about to say. But essentially, let's imagine the and I don't know, so that's why I'm asking the question. The majority of those that are saying they're suffering of stress are mothers that are now having to work from home, and during the pandemic, the children had to be at home with them. Is that the fundamental cause of that extra stress? And therefore, when we go to Time Law 2 and we have more of the same, are we actually creating a problem? It'd be really interesting to see if there's any overlay of the makeup of the people that are suffering from stress and so on, compared with, and will that now change given that we're coming out of the pandemic? Because I suspect if Time Law 2 embeds certain activities at home, then maybe some of that won't now change. Again, I don't know the full answer. I'd like some detail and at least a look at it.
Is that the sort of thing that can be released?
I
wasn't asking for it to be released. I was saying that we take account of it, and maybe eventually we have a private report on if something is there to reveal, if we can learn something from it again.
I mean, obviously, it's not something we've looked at in terms of specific data, because that's not how the data is pulled together. It doesn't mean we couldn't have a look at that. It would require probably conversations with managers and employees around their reasons for stress. Because again, that isn't the reason that's
great
published.
Care should be taken in figuring out an approach, and is it worth understanding? Yeah, because if there is a linkage, we can then come up with a program to help with that linkage. But if we don't know the problem, then we can't fix it. So
like I say, it's not something we've looked at. It doesn't mean it isn't something we could have a look at. The one thing I would say is that there's some staff survey data around well-being, employee well-being, and one of the reasons that people are saying that it's affecting their well-being, and this isn't necessarily stress related, is any change program. So of course, Time Law 2 is a change program. And actually, I think the feedback from the staff survey is that people want to get on with it, that people want to make it happen rather than not, because of that level of uncertainty and getting back to normal, whatever normal might look like in terms of, getting over COVID. And obviously we're in a position to move that forward now, given restrictions are slowly being lifted, etc. So there is some data from employees saying that Time Law 2 and those types of change projects are impacting on their well-being, but it's not necessarily stress related. But like I say, we can have a look at it.
Councillor Sandon.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, again, in my experience of managing people, you would like to think that a close manager, is able to see somebody that starts a decline. Current circumstances very much work against that, because you're not seeing people every day. And that's, I mean, I dared to suggest in a meeting the other day that maybe it's time that we do look at how much time people are spending in the office. And again, I say that as somebody that works for the NHS, and as far as I'm concerned, has been fortunate to be able to go into the office for at least half of a week. you know, I don't say that lightly. I genuinely do think it is fortune that I've been able to go in there, interact with my team, and all of my team to come together in at least one day. So you'd like to think that things like that can, and you know, Paul, you're quite right. What is normal? What is the new normal? Yet to be tested, I think. But one of the questions that is a standard in my environment is on a return to work. If that is the reason that's being provided, do you think it's work related? I think it's absolutely essential. And I don't think it's a question that people should shy away from, because you must recognize that your team member may actually be affected by circumstances completely outside the work environment. And again, current environment says that is absolutely more of a potential than it used to be. It's much more wide scale now. People are finding pressures in dealing with so many other things outside of work that, you know, it's very much give and take. It's okay saying that you're not having to pay for childcare, but if you're having to do the childcare, it's a different ballgame. That level of information is critical in my view, as is trying to return to some means of having a regular social-based conversation with people that are in your teams. Thank you, Jim.
You're talking about the massive change in the managing of people in our new world. Time Lord 2 or anywhere else?
Time Lord 2 will have its effects. And for some it will be positive and for some it will be negative. And conversation is the only thing that initially that is going to drive that out. People should not, in my view, be frightened of it. But the conversation that leads people to understand it and buy into it and be on board with it takes skillful working. You know, you shouldn't be crafting something that isn't genuine, but you do need to make sure that the message is being delivered, the right message is being delivered, and that it's being delivered in the right way. But the level of conversation, the general conversation that people were used to 2 years ago, is harder to effect now. I don't think it's a massive, massive change, but and it is something we need to be mindful of. But many organisations are going through this process of looking at how their offices are operationally managed. We won't be the only ones by any stretch of the imagination, but it comes under the banner of management. Genuinely does.
And it's private sector as well as public sector. Anything else at this point? Can I ask you to continue?
Yeah, of course, no problem. So then we're looking at the section on training. So as you probably are aware, we have a range of mandatory and non-mandatory training, and that is delivered in a variety of formats. Some of it is standalone e-learning, but we still have been offering throughout the pandemic a range of other courses that have involved virtual face-to-face, if that's not a misnomer, where we've had internal and external consultants delivering training via Zoom, so an online classroom approach, as well as we have had some face-to-face, physical face-to-face training where that's required in terms of being safe to practice. So, for example, moving and positioning training, etc. Training is commissioned annually, and we're currently undergoing a training needs analysis, which I think closed the end of last week, if I'm correct. So we will be analysing that data, which is looking at information from staff of all levels as to what sort of training is required to do their job and any preferences in terms of face-to-face, bite-sized, virtual, e-learning, etc. In terms of the mandatory training, that works on a 3-yearly cycle. So things like appraisal training, health and safety training, etc., are done on a 3-yearly basis. There are some social care training courses that are required due to standards in that area that are more frequent, and the information security is an annual course. And there's data in this report relating to external and internal trainers. So you can see the figures relating to how much training has been completed, and in the last year, nearly 84.5% of staff undertook some e-learning, And we had an increase in that. So I think people were obviously finding time to, perhaps where there were less meetings, or they could fit them around their home life because they were working virtually, they were accessing courses. So a total of 7,419 courses were completed in the 2021, which is the first year of the pandemic. Obviously, we haven't got the data for the current year in there. I'll pause at that point in case there's a question relating to training.
Okay. Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you. I think the number I can't see easily is the percentage of mandatory trainings that are being skipped, because I do have a recollection that it wasn't 100% perfect on mandatory, and that's obviously the mandatory ones are they're meant to be mandatory, so some numbers there. And I am a little confused as to, as we've all I kind of get it in 2019, 2020, in that we would have a dip down as everybody suddenly have to shift to working from home and so on. But a year later, to still not have even recovered, given that more emphasis had been put on remote working and all of the issues associated with connecting and so on and so forth, had been well resolved by then, that we're still below where we were in 2018, 2019. So I'm a little confused. What's the underlying reason, or do we have any explanation as to why we remain lower than where we were 2 years ago?
Obviously, I think in terms of the non-mandatory e-learning, so people completing other e-learning courses that weren't mandatory, with responding to the pandemic, there has been less time to do the nice to-dos than the mandatory training. As I said, the mandatory training is on a 3-year cycle as well. So you won't, depending on how many staff are on each year are reaching that 3-year refresher, will fluctuate the numbers to some degree. And we did have to, we have reduced some of the training because in some cases our external trainers weren't happy, for example, to physically come in and deliver that training, or to deliver it via Zoom. So we couldn't, if the trainers weren't willing to deliver that, then that caused us an issue.
Would it be possible to get that number of mandatory trainings that have been skipped into 3-year cycle or not? It would, what's the trend? Is there a trend? Yeah.
Perhaps that's one for next time.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we publish anyway on a regular basis, because there are KPIs against the mandatory training. So, I mean, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly where the
So I can look it up somewhere, is what you're saying.
But it is published, and it's something we can share regularly.
Quarterly published by our strategic democratic services, I believe, every quarter.
Okay, I'll look at it then. Thank you.
And I think the other thing just to think about in terms of training offer, as Abby said, we have just completed a training needs analysis, and I think a review of our training programme is probably long overdue, and therefore this gives us that opportunity to actually have a look at what staff want. So we hold the corporate training budget. We don't run or have budget for individuals having different training. But in terms of that corporate training budget, making sure we get a return on investment, making sure we deliver what actually people want and desire, if you like, that helps them deliver their job. That's why we're doing that training needs analysis, and therefore that programme will be revamped, and hopefully people will want to do a bit more training because it probably will be geared to their direction of travel and what the organisation needs.
Is there any chance of changing? Is there any chance of changing the emphasis from the word want to need? Yeah. I mean, I want an awful lot of stuff, but there are things I need. Training that staff need. I'm really keen that we deliver that first before. Well, yes, but ideally the need first, then the want.
The need first and then the want, absolutely. But yes, we'll try and deliver both if we can. That would be lovely. So, yeah.
Okay. Councillor Sumner. Councillor Brooks, are you not able to use the... Councillor Sumner, shall we let him talk?
Councillor Chairman, thank you. And forgive me if I'm causing you difficulties. Firstly, I think we've got to be careful here as members Because if they did the member table on whether the members go to the training or member development courses, as they call them, and the percentage of members take them up, we may not look too good. So you might want to give us a little G up on that, HR. But it's not just about attending a course. You touched on it in terms of effectiveness. I've done a lot of training over the years of recruiters, hundreds and hundreds of them. I've trained people to start up recruitment companies, and I've tried to be so conscious of what are they taking away from the training. It can be, apart from procedural training, technical training, if it's more into techniques, I try to focus on 3 things they might take away and adopt, not 33 things in a 1 hour or 2 hour training session. And if the training is effective, Chairman, they'll want to go to it. So I'm glad you're telling me you're going to look at effectiveness. You've got to look at your internal trainers as to how good they are at training. You can't take somebody out of a desk and say, go and train somebody, and suddenly they're a good trainer. It doesn't work like that. So this is useful, reasonably encouraging, I think. If we could, keep it up. I think that if we could get back, as Councillor Abb said, to number of courses completed, but it's not just about how many courses. That's people. You haven't done 8,500 courses. That's number of delegates who've gone through that training courses. But it is highly dependent on how enjoyable and effective that training is, Chairman.
Do you assess effectiveness?
So we do ask for feedback in relation to the quality of the trainer, the quality of course, whether it's meeting people's needs, if you like, in terms of managing their expectations around those courses. That's something I think we will be looking at so when we do our training needs analysis and we determine what the programme is, we'll also look at, like I say, that return on investment. Are we actually having the right trainers? Are we delivering the right sort of training? Does it meet our needs as an organisation? And therefore we'll look at that continuous feedback loop, if you like, in terms of making sure that is effective, that training. Like I say, we do ask for feedback, but I think it's something we could probably improve upon.
Okay. Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chairman. Good point, well made, Councillor Brooks, with regards to members. Totally agree with that. And I do think that one of the things that we should take the opportunity to do is to use a virtual training room, as opposed to members being, or anybody else being sat face to face, because I think too often, and I would include my own organisation in this, there's an opportunity there which isn't being taken. Whereas a room may be limited on numbers, a virtual training session shouldn't be. So it's things like that. I think for me, the training sort of comes into 3 brackets. There's the training that's job critical, it's essential, otherwise you can't do your job. There's mandatory training, which, is there labelled accordingly. And then there's personal development. Personal development is the nice to do's and the interested ins, and those are the sort of things that, going back to appraisals, I would expect to be recorded as such, and therefore you have made a statement that you, as the individual being appraised, want to do something, you're interested in doing something, your manager hopefully can support you in that, and then when your next review comes round, there's another target there that you can sit and discuss, and it's informative as to how it went, whether it's benefited, and why. But with job critical and with mandatory training, and going back to Councillor Abb's point, you are either within or without. Doesn't matter when you sat the course. If it's a 3-year accreditation, you are covered by that until such time as either everybody needs to sit and redo it because there's been a wholesale change in the way that it's being done, or the actual topic itself, or you've reached a point where I would expect you to be getting reminders because you've got a month before that accreditation runs out. So there's, having numbers of the courses that have been attended brilliant, and I am encouraged by the volume of the number at the bottom there. But for me, if you've got mandatory training ticked and it's for 12 months or it's for 3 years, you've either got it or you haven't got it. And that needs to be accounted for as part of the longer, because if you look at that table that we've got, it covers 3 years. So, you know, people could be covered for that entirety.
Can I just also add in one point? In 2018-19, we did do every member of every member of staff had to complete GDPR training, because there was obviously some changes in law. So every staff member was required to complete that. So that may be one factor why our 2018-19 figures are higher, in that there was a specific course that all staff had to complete on that occasion.
Did you mean to put a pie chart in twice, or a different pie chart? I think I can't see anything different on the pie charts, and I wondered if there's one missing. I'm not sure it's terribly germane to what we're trying to do, but
it looks like that. Yeah, it looks like the same. So apologies, that was just a repeat. It wasn't an intentional repeat. And to just pick on Councillor Sumner's point, the one-to-one form and the appraisal form both talk about personal development. That is part of that piece.
Okay. I see the council chamber camera has gone out. This is just on my screen. Doesn't stop us moving on. Shall we move on to recruitment?
So the next section is looking at an overview of recruitment. As you might expect, we have had a dip in the number of starters and leavers in the 2020-21 year. That's largely around, obviously, people were enjoying the security of the public sector, and also people responding to the pandemic, etc. So the recruitment market was quite unusual in that period of time. Voluntary turnover and turnover generally has come down. Again, that is partly, I think, due to the recruitment market and people responding to pandemic and wanting the security of the public sector. It's encouraging to see that the average length of service is increasing, so that's showing that we don't have any significant issues with particular groups of people, age groups leaving, etc., which is important, or that, you know, people are leaving within their first few months or first year, which suggests that things like probation and induction are working well. So yeah, because of the instability in the wider market, I think we have retained staff. We have key performance indicators, which I won't go through, but those are there for the last few years. There are a couple of those that are fairly new KPIs, hence the reason we don't have data going back. What I would say is that apprenticeships and work experience were affected again by the pandemic in terms of the ability to be able to bring young people into the office when we were working remotely, etc. But I'm pleased to say that, as you can see from the 2021-22 data, that is starting to go back up, and we are regularly pushing work experience and apprenticeships as part of our recruitment initiatives. Did you want me to stop at that point or continue through to the equalities data?
I know that Councillor Abbs has his electric hand up, but I also am all too well aware that Councillor Brooks has been sort of mentally waving his hand at me since the start of the meeting. Would you like to talk?
Mine will be on recruitment as well. Are you happy to take that now, Chairman? Then
shall we just stick to the way it's going through?
So retention, and I come back to recruitment.
Come back to recruitment.
Thank you very much. Well, on retention, I like the trend on turnover. So in 16-17, 16.24%, coming down to 14%, 19, 20. That's all largely pre-pandemic by a month or so. And I think if you're getting that turnover down, it has such a good effect on the organisation. We can argue what is in a healthy turnover. Below 10% certainly becomes unhealthy. But if you can get it around about 12%, you're saving an awful lot of corporate knowledge. You're saving money on the disruption of levers. You're saving money on recruitment of new people, new joiners. As I say, some of that is healthy. So although the 2021 is now down to 9.29%, and Abby explained why that very much, we can understand why. I wonder if there should be some corporate target, even a soft target, that says, can we get that down to about 12%? There's a lot of savings to be made if we can. Is it a false target? Well, there's been a lot of arguments over the years about what is healthy turnover, but I like the trend, and I thought I would say so. Thank you.
Is it okay if I just come back on that?
Do.
So we have a KPI currently that is less than 14% for our turnover, and we benchmark that against sort of the LG Informed. So we are looking to do that. I think the point is we also want to increase our diversity and equality stats, and so there is a balance there to be had, as you rightly say, in terms of when does turnover become too low or too high. You want that happy medium, but that's part of the reason we've got a KPI of less than 14% for turnover at the moment.
Councillor Abs.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Contractors. We a certain one department at least I know of, planning, has an awful lot of them at the moment for various reasons. How does a contractor on, some of them on reasonably long term contracts with us, how does that vector into the numbers you're showing, or is it just not included at all?
The turnover figures are based on employees, so those with a contract of employment with the organisation, as distinct from agency or contractor staff who would be off the, separate from that. We do have some locums, but those wouldn't be included in these figures. This is about employees of the council.
Is your microphone on? I'm having great.
No, it's not. Thank you very much, Chairman. I pressed it and then pressed it again, obviously. Just to repeat what I said, it'll be interesting to see if any of this applies to the contractor world because they are a more expensive resource to bring in. But so any issue there would be even more expensive.
I would need to talk to my colleagues in commissioning who manage that contract, but because I don't have access to that data, but that's something I can pass on.
Okay. Any other questions, comments at this stage? Okay, would you like to move on?
Yeah. So equalities data, I think, is fairly self-explanatory and is reflective of the census data. At the moment, we're comparing against the 2011 census data, but we hope to obviously have access to the 2021 data in due course, so we can look at that. But in terms of our statistics, we are comparable to the population of West Berkshire when looking at that. That doesn't mean we don't strive, however, to improve and become more diverse. And one of the things we're currently looking at is an equality and diversity strategy, which one of my colleagues is dealing with. Is it okay to move on to?
Councillor Abs has his hand up. Old hand, please move on.
Okay, so then on page 28, we have some information about sources of job applications, so that the main job come directly through our website. And you can see that we do advertise through other means, but we've summarised that the large amount of traffic comes through our Jobs Go Public site. Are you happy with that information?
Mm-hmm. Oh. Councillor Brooks.
Enthusiasm when you call me chairman.
Must I?
I've got a lot to say on recruitment, and maybe I should wait until until Abby has completed her introduction on the recruitment side.
Might make sense.
Thank you.
Okay, so then we have some data on agency spend. As I say, we're looking at off and on contract spend there. That's covered by the commissioning service through Commensura. And so we only started with them in 1920, hence the reason there's no data going back further than there. As you can see, the has been an increase in spend, and that has been mainly due to trying to respond to the exceptionally high demand for professional staff, particularly adult social care, but also due to some national shortages that we've had within recruitment arena that are well known. The agency spend varies by service, but as you can see, adult social care is a large part of what we do. So, if I may move on.
Please do.
Have you finished recruitment then?
We're going to talk about recruitment projects and strategies shortly.
I think you were also short of a microphone.
I've got councillor's twitchy finger on it, I think. Councillor had twitchy finger on it. And I'll preface what I say by saying that I've been in recruitment 38 years in May, built 3 agencies and sold them. I was 10 years vice chairman of the employment trade body, and in fact have won awards for helping companies, over 150 companies I've advised in the last 15 years. So I like to offer advice in this, and I'm very happy to offer it outside of this meeting. As you review your recruitment strategies, I was actually sat down with an officer and walked through the process of bringing on board a managed service provider who turned out to be Commensura. So the offer is there. I'll make a few comments then. If you look at the table on page 29, which is the Commensura, which is the contract spend. When you say off contract, what you mean is off panel. What you mean is those are not going through your managed service provider, Commensura. And therefore, you're not getting the rebate on those. And therefore, you have about a third of your recruitment not going through your managed service provider because your hiring managers are doing something else. They are not going through Commensura, who go to the market, a bunch of approved agencies to bring in the staff you need. So you're missing quite a lot of annual rebate there, potentially, unless I'm wrong. I would imagine, and this is a question, that direct applications to your website go through Commensura. Okay. So does that explain, Abby, why so much is off contract spend?
So Commensura only deal with items that don't go out to direct recruitment, or we've been unsuccessful with direct recruitment. So we tried to direct recruit, or if there's a specific reason that we need to do something quickly, like need somebody in tomorrow, all our requirements go through Commensura initially. However, if that isn't successful, then it could be that then other agencies or other means are used. And that's the, as you quite rightly say, the off-contract.
So thank you.
So none of our direct recruitment, all our website jobs go public is our direct recruitment, and we do most.
So what you've told me, you go to Commensura in the first regard, you put it on the website at that point, our website at that point.
It depends on what the situation is. Most of the time we go out directly first, then internally, then we might do internal, external at the same time. If we don't fulfill through that process, then we could ask Commensura to assist. And if Commensura can't assist, as in they can't provide the quality of the candidates, then it may be other agencies that are approached.
Well, I would be interested in seeing the service level agreement. And the SLA will dominate the process of where you advertise, how quickly you respond. There's a whole gamut of stuff around an SLA. I'm very happy to talk to you about that, because in my recruitment experience, it's often the hiring company that is the problem rather than the agency. I'd like to dig in a little bit more to the off-contract spend, not necessarily today, but you can see a potential for better rebates there. Is there an employee referral scheme? So if Stephen recommended Sadie, he would get some recompense for that. Are we encouraging our staff to find other people? There's a whole raft of things around here that not just that's for maybe permanent hires or even for contract hire. Lots of questions around here. That too many for today, Chairman. And I want to come back on the website. I was aghast, frankly, that commissioning manages the commensurate web service. Absolutely aghast. Commissioning are there, procurement, it really is. We call it commissioning because we want to be different. But commissioning, procurement is there to bring on board the supplier. Once the supplier is in place, it is the service users that should be reviewing that contract, the service users that should be reviewing the SLA, because procurement have done their job, and all they're there for then is for contract management, but not for actually service quality. So this means that HR are stifled in some way from actually getting to grips with the commensurate and saying, can you do better? Why are you missing your SLA? And I don't want to go into how much fulfillment they're doing of the requests that they get, but that's important. It all comes down to how many vacancies they got, how many people did they put up, how many were interviewed, what's the interview to offer ratio, what's the offer to placement ratio. There's a whole techniques in this, Chairman, and I'm going on too long, but and you won't want to grip all this now, but it is useful to grip this, because here is efficiency gain, financial gain, and I say better staff gain. Now I'll come onto the website later because you haven't done the website yet, Abby. I actually went on the website last night and looked to see if I was an applicant, would I be attracted to that? But I'll come back if I may. But there's a whole, you don't even have to answer me on all these points, but I think another conversation outside of this room could be very helpful if you wish to.
Abby, would you like to comment at this point?
I can't comment as to why the commensurate contract was placed with commissioning has remained with there. That's something that Paul and I can take away from this meeting and discuss with Michael.
Maybe Councillor Wollaston has a comment to make.
I think we're very fortunate in having a councillor who clearly is very experienced in this field, and I would very much welcome his help and assistance to the team.
But that might be for some conversation outside of this meeting.
Precisely.
Excellent. Then we'll look forward to hearing some results of that conversation.
Okay. So moving on. So now in the final section, I'm looking to give an overview of some of the aspects that we are, some of our recruitment projects and strategies and activities. So we are looking with our comms team to improve our council jobs and careers web pages. So the whole of that is being currently designed and reworked as we speak. That's going to involve a number of focus groups with existing staff, managers, and we're going to try and tap into candidates who perhaps didn't apply, but obviously we will need to liaise with some of our colleagues in JobsGo Public to see if we can access who's clicked on our website but hasn't actually applied. We, of course, do have the workforce strategy, which has a range of matters within there, looking at career pathways, diversity in recruitment. We have our apprenticeship strategy, and as the data shows, we have been utilising and have had a lot of apprenticeships during our 3 years. And for Apprenticeship Week, we did some social media campaigns to try, and different ways like Day in the Life of, to try and add some variety to the way that we promote us as an organisation. We've successfully taken part in the Kickstart scheme. So we took on 19 Kickstart posts, many of which are converting to either apprenticeships or permanent roles. We have done some promotional videos, and as I've touched base on before, we're also looking to do work experience to again widen our under the local community's understanding of what we can offer. And we are in particular working on a project to do a special educational needs and disabilities work experience programme, which is an area that is quite difficult for pupils with a SEND to access. So we have looked at a range of our projects, and there is a list of all the projects. I won't go through them, but what we've tried to do is look at them in terms of the various stages of the employee life cycle. So whether that be attracting, recruiting, onboarding, learning and development, the reward and recognition, progression and performance, and retaining, and also, you know, in some cases, as we've said, the exit. So as you can see from page 34, there are quite a range of activities that are either in progress or to be progressed to try and work both from an internal perspective, that may be making processes, etc., slicker, but also from improving our employer brand externally.
Thank you. Is that an old hand? Councillor Brooks.
This is an old hand.
I know that too, but that wasn't what I was referring to.
So all of that is good. Social media is where you look to get attention, but you'll point that any interested party back at the website. I went on the website last night and I looked and it said, apply for job. So I found myself straight away. I prefer we are hiring, but apply for job works. I then clicked through and found a search engine to search for my ideal job. Since you only had about 20 jobs on there, you don't need a search engine. You might as well just load the list and I'll look down and find myself. You had something nice about what's it like to work for West Berkshire Council, and you had some talking heads. I think the famous Gabriel Mancini is on there. But you missed a trick, and this is perhaps for your review. When I come in and it says, what's West Berkshire like to work for? I think I'd like to see the leader of council and the chief exec saying, this is a wonderful council to work for. And that draws me in. And then the employee testimonials are important, but they're a secondary to that welcome to West Berkshire. So these are simply fixed, but important in themselves. And then when you click through to the job itself, it's basically a job description. It gets very wordy. You've got a lot of visuals you could use there. There's nothing about the area in that. When I'm in that space, I'm not seeing all the loveliness of West Berkshire and why it is a good place to work. I think there's a lot of work could be done on that to improve it. And you are saying it could, which is excellent. So, you know, once you've got the person there, and you need to see how many are visiting, how many are following through from visiting your web, how many applications you're getting through there. This can all be monitored. You might be doing some of it already. But the more you drive traffic to your website, the probably less you pay agencies anyway. And we haven't looked at agency spend this morning. Just coming back to, say, commensurate, every application you get, do you put it on an applicant tracking system, a database? So when you come out and want to recruit again, you can go back to that database and see if there's any people who weren't successful before, who chose not to join us, that we can draw in. Again, I'm back to techniques, Chairman, but you know, you can see that my points may have some merit. Thank you.
And perhaps that's another thing that Councillor Willison and yourself might be discussing in the future. Any comment?
I was just going to say that through Jobs Co Public, we do have an applicant tracking, so we can see obviously the number of clicks, where those have come from, and applicants that it's directly fed from the website. So Jobs Go Public has joined up. That search engine that you're seeing is, so when people apply, they're going through to the applicant tracking system, and we do get data from that in terms of a number of people applying. And in some cases, we have used talent pools as well. So particularly around children and families and adult social care both have a microsite. And we have done talent pools for social workers, for example, to try and go back. And we do have rolling campaigns for some roles because of that hard to recruit to roles. So we do have some data related to the applicant tracking system. And we can then go back to applicants who maybe were unsuccessful this time, but we're still interested in them, and I encourage them to apply for another role, pull their application forward to another role. So
Good. That's Rabs.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. My area of expertise is technology for marketing. So I help a bunch of companies set up marketing campaigns. And to Councillor Brooks's point, it's very, very useful to, and Google Analytics will do it for you, to put any advert that you put up there, make sure you put the right kind of tracking link in. So that when they arrive at your website, it's all labeled up nice and clearly so that you can see the percentage of it. So then you can work out how good your adverts are in your social media, what lines are catching people's attention and so on. And you have this evolving ever. And also within Google Analytics, you can look at the journeys the people are taking when they arrive. So you have them land here. Do they go? Whereabouts do they go? If you've got other links, it's a holistic view from end to end. And I think what Councillor Brooks was going on about, it's all right, you're capturing the stuff once you've got it, and the program's someone's applied, but actually there's just as much interest in people who's coming and looking in the first place and trying to link back to them. There's a lot to be learnt there as an organisation. So if you need any help in that area, similar as, let me know, because it's all quite straightforward, but there's lots of YouTube videos you can watch on it as well. So yeah.
thank you. I'll pass it on to the digital team and the HR project team that are doing the website.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Or comments? Are we at the end of that paper? I do believe we are.
So we were, this is obviously the first time you've had this information, this format, and so feedback in terms of whether there's anything missing, i.e. you talked about mandatory training, so we can make sure that's populated. And if there's anything else that you wanted us to consider in relation to data, the answer is probably every 6 months. I think some of the reports we could probably look at doing quarterly, but because we do an annual employment report that is published after the end of March, I think we just need to have a look at that and see whether there's any duplication of effort. But we're thinking 6 months in the format that you've got, but possibly doing it more regular for some of those areas. If, things like sickness absence, we could probably do more regularly, or training data, whatever you would consider appropriate.
Sounds good to me. Good. In which case, we're asked to note the report. We note the report. Thank you. Item 5.
Pay policy. Yep, pay policy.
Pay policy.
Okay, so this is me. In terms of the pay policy, I'm not going to go through it in any detail. This is a statutory annual requirement that we have to publish a pay policy under the Localism Act. So what you've got in front of you really is a kind of repeated policy with updated figures on the basis of the information that is required to meet the requirements of the Localism Act. Like I say, I'm not going to go through it in any detail. It's not a massively long paper. It does have to go to full council. So it has been through a variety of boards already. And from here, it will go to full council and it has to be published by the 1st of April. So that's why we're kind of bringing the paper to you now. I think the only thing I am going to point out is that, as people will probably be aware, there isn't a pay award yet. There isn't a national pay award. So obviously the pay policy can't be fully updated at this stage because we don't have a national pay award, and therefore we can't agree our local pay award. And that's reflected within the paper. And I think we also think that you might have missed having the pay grades. So I don't know whether they were circulated, but we might have noticed this morning that that document might have been missing from the papers, but Abby did print some copies out if anybody was interested. So thank you. I'll take questions.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. Two very brief points. Firstly, we, as a council policy, we have change history at the back of documents, not at the front. And my only other point is on 2.1.6. There looks like there could be a missing post there, or it could just be a point that's been added in by mistake. So 2.1.6
Yeah, it's a bullet point missing, isn't there?
was an extra, there's an extra bullet point.
It's an extra bullet point.
Okay, thank you.
And the comment about the changes document being at the front has already been picked up, I think, as part of Ops Board. Unfortunately, because of having to publish the papers quite quickly, that was missed. So we will take that on board and make sure that it is amended before it goes to council.
Did he pick it up at Ops Board?
I don't know. I didn't go, but I know somebody picked it up and and it was fed back. But unfortunately, we had to publish the papers. So yes, it will be amended for council.
I think Councillor Bridgman picked it up first.
Oh, silly me.
Surprise, surprise.
Right. Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, just a minor one. I've mentioned this in the past about package, and packages now referred to reasonably often in this document, but then we refer back to highest paid, and I'd like to see if package is package, and the more we reflect the package, we're more likely to recruit people, because the packages look a lot more attractive than necessarily just the salaries. You know, working for this organisation is much more than just what you get in your pay pack at the end of the month. Other than that, just a bit more kind of clarity on more use of package rather than pure salary. Salary is interesting, but it's not the only thing.
View on
that? I suppose there's a question around the fact that this meets the requirements of the statutory pay policy. So I'm happy to look at package, and actually, as we've just had a conversation around recruitment activity and our employer branding, I think that's something that we do need to have a look at as the offer that we make to our employees. Now, whether it makes it into this document, I would say probably not, certainly at this moment in time, but I do think you're right. I think that's something we do need to reflect elsewhere, and whether that's on our recruitment website in terms of offer or whether that's elsewhere, then I'm happy to do that. But I think for the purposes of this document, we need to make sure obviously it makes its way through to meet the statutory requirements.
Seems a fair comment. Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chairman. Just some clarity with regards to point 1 and point 2, really. Wording of which is the same for both. I would question whether the purpose of the report is to seek council's approval, whilst the recommendation may be. I would suggest that the purpose of the report is to give the detail behind the statements made in the executive summary. So just some reflection on that. And also noting comments at the start with regards to some elements not being able to be populated at this stage. Again, will it come back to us before council, or are we actually in a position where it will be picked up in the next round of full council meetings in March?
This needs to go to full council in March, doesn't it?
Yeah, this has to go to full council in March. I'm not sure in terms of the gaps that are missing. So
I think it might be referring to like the salaries and the pay award, and of course we won't have the pay award.
we won't have that.
Because at the moment, what's in there is the current.
So what we will
salary
publish is the current position on the basis of the council, its pay grades, etc. So we have to publish this, unfortunately. If pay awards are agreed, it won't be updated because that's what will be agreed. And actually, this has been a bit of a theme for other councils having the same conversation, because we're all having to publish our pay policies. The pay award and any changes will be reflected in next year's pay policy, not within this one. Does that make sense? Yeah. You publish as is rather than, backdating it.
Any other comments on this paper? No, thank you. Well, we are asked to vote on this with those various notes. We are asked to approve this. So could I have a proposer, please?
Happy to propose, Chairman.
Do I have a second?
Happy to second, Chairman.
Thank you. All in favour? All in favour? Right. Thank you, members. Date of next meeting is listed to be on the 29th of April, 10 a.m. I'm also asked if there are any changes for the forward plan. Do we have any changes? No changes? In that case, I think we can close the meeting. Thank you, members.